Susanna Cahalan is sick, sadly, but I wanted to read her blurb, which I thought summed it up quite nicely. Hidden Valley Road raises the bar on what is possible in narrative journalism. A marvel of reportage, research, and style, Bob Kolker dives into the exceptional story of one family besieged by humanity's most mysterious malady. Kolker writes about the Galvan family with elegance and insight while weaving together the decades-long quest to understand the genetics of schizophrenia, somehow creating a story that is as haunting and intriguing as a great Gothic novel. This book is a triumph, an unforgettable story that you should read right now. Well said. And someone else had something lovely to say. Who was that, Bob? I just ordered my books, our magic copy. It arrived yesterday. And I was surprised to see an Oprah's Book Club 2020 sticker already on there. So how did you keep this a secret, and how did that happen, first of all?
First of all, hi, Ada, and again, hello to Susanna. If you're able to dial in for this, I'm so sorry you couldn't be a part of this, and I wanted to thank everybody else for coming. And particularly, I wanted to thank you for supporting Books Are Magic, which is a terrific bookstore. And sorry, can't be there in person, but I'll be there, I'm sure, in the coming months. I got a call about 3 weeks ago. It was from no caller ID, and I let it go to spam, and nobody left a message, so I thought it was spam. And then I got an email from a fellow who I think is on part of the Zoom event tonight, Michael Goldsmith, the director of publicity at Doubleday, and he said, "I have a reporter who's trying to reach you. Could you pick up the next time your phone rings?" And I said, okay. And then I wondered why he was being so cryptic. Why wasn't he saying that, you know, Entertainment Weekly is going to call me at 2 p.m. But the phone rang, and then I heard, "This is Oprah Winfrey," and I just kind of collapsed to the floor and started laughing. Because I laughed, and it wasn't one of these, like, this is a joke, right? Because her voice was so recognizable. And after I got over the thrill of that, of being selected, I thought about the Galvan family, some of whom will guys, stay tuned later. There are a couple of family members, I believe, who are part of the Zoom event tonight, and you'll meet them. But I thought, how strange it must be to have worked to have dreamt of having your story known to the world for so long, to have worked so hard to make sure that it all happened in the way you had hoped it would happen, to have the book come out in the middle of an epidemic and not be able to leave your house. And then for Oprah Winfrey to decide that your family's story was the one everyone should pay attention to. And I just felt really, really wonderful for them. And I certainly hope they're happy. I'm sad I can't be in Colorado either, but hope this event can help a little bit.
That's wonderful. Are you up for reading a short passage?
Sure. This is something short from the introduction of the book that helps with a little bit of background just for anybody who's coming into this cold.
Great.
We're talking about it's a family of 12 children, and 6 of them became severely mentally ill, one after the other. 6 of the Galvin boys took ill at a time when so little was understood about schizophrenia, and so many different theories were colliding with one another that the search for an explanation overshadowed everything about their lives. They lived through the eras of institutionalization and shock therapy, the debates between psychotherapy versus medication, the needle in a haystack search for genetic markers for the disease, and the profound disagreements about the cause and origin of the illness itself. There was nothing generic about how they each experienced the illness. Donald, Jim, Brian, Joseph, Matthew, and Peter each suffered differently, requiring different treatments and a panoply of shifting diagnoses and prompting conflicting theories about the nature of schizophrenia. Some of those theories could be especially cruel to the parents, who often took the blame as if they caused the disease by something they did or did not do. The children who did not become mentally ill were in many respects as affected as their brothers. It is hard enough to individuate oneself in a family with 12 children. Here was a family that was defined by dynamics like no other, where the state of being mentally ill became the norm of the household. For Lindsay and Margaret and their brothers, John, Richard, Michael, and Mark, being a member of the Galvan family was about either going insane yourself or watching your family go insane. Even if they happened not to descend into delusions or hallucinations or paranoia, they felt as if they were carrying an unstable element inside themselves. How much longer, they wondered, before it would overtake them too.
Beautiful. So, and for anybody joining now, the buy link is in the group chat, and that's where you'll add your questions also. So I have a few questions, we'll have a conversation, and then everyone start putting your questions into the chat, and then I will ask them. So first of all, maybe you could just talk about how you came upon the story. I think I saw John Gluck in the little gallery view there. So.
Oh, good. Is it? I wondered aloud with John yesterday whether there's a way to stand up and take a bow during a Zoom event. But the story begins long before I met the Galvins. It begins probably back in the '90s when Margaret Galvan Johnson, who's I believe also in on the call, really dreamed of a book like this. There were some discussions with her sister Lindsay, who I believe and hope is on the call. The two of them discussed it on and off over many, many years, and then finally decided that it was best to find a journalist who could look at the whole thing as an outsider, talk to everybody in the family, talk to experts, look at medical records. And that's when they talked to John Gluck. John Gluck is one of the best editors in the magazine business, and he was my editor at New York Magazine for 10 years. And he went to boarding school with Lindsay, the youngest Galvin child, and was also friendly with Margaret over the years. And when they came to him, he suggested me, which is, in hindsight, the nicest thing anyone could have ever done, because it's been wonderful to meet this family and get to know them and to tell their story.
That's great. So we work together at New York Magazine, and I know that you are very good at getting people to talk to you. This is an exceptional feat in this case, though, of course, because it's very sensitive material. And I know the two of them wanted the story shared, but you were able to speak with every member of the family. Is that right? And how, besides your natural charm, were you able to convince them and with you?
I think the short answer is very slowly. We took it very slowly, which again, I'm amazed at Margaret and Lindsay too, because my answer to them when we were on the phone, I said, if something happens, it's probably not going to happen overnight. Books take a long time to begin with, but it's going to take a lot of talking to a lot of family members to make sure everybody is comfortable with this. And particularly with medical privacy laws, people could stand up and really object to their private information making it into a book. So I took it very slowly, and once a week got on the phone with different family members, starting with the matriarch of the family, Mimi Galvin, who died in 2017. I talked to her before that many times, and on the phone, and then in person a few times as well. And then after a matter of months, also talking to medical researchers, it became more and more feasible, and it really built up a momentum quite on its own. But by the time it was time to get a book together and sell a book to a publisher, I really had a lot of interviews already and kind of knew the people involved and started to have an idea of how to tell the story as a book, because it wasn't immediately clear to me at the beginning how to do it.
And was there a moment when you knew it was a book and not a magazine article? You've written a lot of amazing long form stories.
Well, the idea of writing about a family with 12 children and 2 parents, to write about 14 people, 6 of whom were mentally ill, was intimidating. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is a science magazine story. Maybe I could interview one of the researchers and make the researcher the hero of the story, and then the family could be a little vaguer in the article. I wouldn't have to go deeply into anyone else. And then I really didn't think about that for long. I kind of moved away from that, because I must say that it's hard for me to build up a real head of steam to work on something for years unless I'm really writing about people. I'm just not as much of an ideas writer as I am a person who writes about people. So the ideas flow from there. They come up after a lot of reporting. So the family became the thing, and luckily, thank goodness, they all were interested.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Mimi, the mother, who's a very vivid character in the book. Can you talk a little bit about what struck you about her as a character, and what those conversations were like for you?
Well, I think a lot of stories about families, particularly ones with tragedy, the mother ends up being the bad guy, and it's a little troubling that our culture does it that way. And certainly, both Mimi and her husband Don, back in the 60s, when things were really going terribly for their family, didn't have the tools to handle a lot of what happened to them, and really struggled. And there was a huge shame factor, a lot of stigma, and so they covered up a lot of what was going on too. And the children who live to remember it really don't were not happy about that. But then a very interesting thing happened, which is that in recent years, the children became adults and started to do what we all do, which is look back and reevaluate our parents and look at them with new eyes. And so you see that, I think you see that reflected in Hidden Valley Road in the book. In the beginning, you think, oh my goodness, I wouldn't do that if I were a parent, or this is wrong. And then as the book goes on and the children grow up, they start to reconsider Mimi and see the strengths that she had that they had taken for granted for so long.
That's great. Yeah, and just your work often champions women in a way that that I want to just applaud you for. And you mentioned that this was something that was blamed often on the mother. Can you just give a quick history of schizophrenia and how our thinking has evolved since that time when we thought, oh, the mother's causing it all?
When psychoanalysis really took off in the middle of the 20th century, they felt like any mental illness could be cured, and the cause of most mental illness was the way you were brought up. So despite the fact that when schizophrenia was first defined at the turn of the century, people thought it was a physical thing, the descendants of Freud really thought that they could, if they worked hard enough and cared enough and therapized enough, they could really break through the barrier and pull the person out of their imaginary world and make them part of reality again, and that somehow would be accomplishable. But what that meant was you blamed the parents for the problem. And there were psychoanalysts who even recommended pulling mentally ill children out of their homes because the parents must really be doing a number on them. And the term is schizophrenogenic mother, which is a term I'd heard about refrigerator mothers with autism, and which is a parallel story. But the schizophrenic mother is the mother who does such a double whammy of weird mixed messages to their child that the child creates a reality of their own to cope. It's sort of, it seems ridiculous now, but what you have to remember is that these therapists were doing battle with eugenicists who wanted to sterilize these people and people who wanted to give mentally ill people lobotomies. So they at least were considering them to be human beings. So it's amazing the number of misguided ideas that all were colliding against one another in the middle of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm. And what is the latest thinking? Are there new developments? And I know that the Galvan family has, as you've shown, like contributed to this new thinking and new research.
Well, the bad parenting theory has really fallen away. And biological psychiatry is the thing now. Of course, the idea being you can use drugs to resolve issues, whether they're biochemical issues or genetic issues. But it's been very successful for bipolar illness and for depression, but it's been oversold with schizophrenia and psychosis and the real tough stuff. The medicines are helpful, but they're helpful with treating symptoms. They really do nothing about a cure. So it can lead to some pretty sad situations where the cure can be as bad as the disease, lots of physical side effects and a loss of your personality. It can be troubling. But to answer your question, today we're in the era of genetics, and it was thought that once you sequence the genome, you would solve every medical problem by dinner time. But it really hasn't happened that way. And complex diseases like schizophrenia, they found over 100 different errant genes that could be very small factors in the disease. And so you're back where you started again, which leads us to the Galvins. Families like the Galvins with a lot of schizophrenia in them can then become the focus of research to see if there's something about that family that points the way toward how schizophrenia operates in the brain, which is a weird thing to say because you would think we would know how schizophrenia operates in the brain after 100 years, but we really don't. We're really, in many ways, still at square one, which makes it a really tricky effort.
That's great. So, okay, so now this was the point I was going to ask you how the family feels about the book now that it's out, and to ask you if you had stayed in touch with them. And right before we got on, you told me that you are in fact in touch with them, and they may be here. Do we know if we can turn them on?
I'm in regular touch with a lot of family members, and COVID really kept me from being out there to do some TV tapings with them, and is keeping me now from going to celebrate. So I'm just so pleased that some of them are here tonight. I'll start with Margaret Galvin Johnson. Margaret, are you here? And perhaps we'll see if your mic's working, and if not, you can wave.
I'm here.
Hi. Ray, it's so good to see you. It's so funny. You write a book about someone I haven't seen you in months.
It's been a while. Yeah, hi. How are you doing?
Well, I'll do my host thing. Margaret's a very talented visual artist. Her work is sitting behind you, actually. Maybe you can tell us about it in a second. But more to the point, Margaret dreamed of a book decades ago, and really wanted this to happen. And basically, I'm only part of this effort because of her, and I owe her a great debt of gratitude. And more than that, she also is the only Galvan family member who kept very elaborate diaries and wrote autobiographical memory essays to try to remember things that happened in her life. And as a journalist, of course, one gets excited that there are going to be these things. And I was very grateful to be able to access them to sort of not just get the flavor of life on Hidden Valley Road, but to get real insight into Margaret's journey, which, like everyone in the family, her journey's been quite something else. So I thought I would ask you, Margaret, about why you kept those diaries and how you think your own process of recovering from trauma, what it's been like in 10 seconds or less.
Right. Well, I think, when I was in therapy a long time ago, and I'm still in therapy, but, the only reason I've gone on this writing journey is because it's a personal recovery expedition, as I like to say. And I also ask myself, what is the legacy that I want to leave to my children when I, move on? And it was writing about this and sharing it. And I knew the biggest impact that it would be to give the story to somebody who, like Robert Kolker, could do it justice. And I'm just so glad that he was able to take this and run with it, because I had been writing and hoping this would turn into something for many, many years. So I called my entire family to get them on board, and here we are today. So
thank you, Margaret. I wanted to introduce Lindsay now. Is Lindsay here? Lindsay Galvin Rauch.
I think she's, oh, there she is.
I'm right here.
Yep. Hi, how are you doing?
With Kate.
I see Ada, but I don't see you, but hello. And
I'm here.
all right, well, hey, with Kate Rauch, terrific. So Lindsay and is the youngest of the 12. Margaret's her older sister, and Kate is one of Lindsay's 2 children. Lindsay's work on this book has been Herculean. Lindsay is the one who filed all of the paperwork and pushed hard to find papers and medical documents on the Galvan family that no one knew ever existed. She's the one who is the chief caretaker of the mentally ill siblings, and so we took more than one trip to go visit all of the brothers and talk with them. She also was the gateway toward access to all of the doctors who were treating them, and really has the most intimate knowledge of the mental illness side of this family. And her own journey, like Margaret's, is simply astonishing. There's an excerpt of the book that's out on Slate right now that focuses on Lindsay's journey, that offers a taste of what she has been through. I'm in awe of both of these women, and I just wanted to introduce and thank Lindsay publicly, but also, I guess, to get the question I thought to ask you is perhaps you could offer a little insight into how the 3 surviving mentally ill brothers are doing these days.
Peter's doing great. He's doing really well. He's seems really happy where he is. The people that in the nursing home in Pueblo where he lives are phenomenal. They communicate with me on a regular basis, and Peter seems to really have settled in there. It's certainly not a lovely place, but the people that are there with him are lovely. And I just saw Peter, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago before this whole COVID thing started. And we all got together and had a nice lunch, and he played pool and he killed Michael on the pool table, killed him. It was awesome. Don's himself, he's same old, funny in his nursing home, doing his thing, but he's stable and well. Matthew, on the other hand, has had his first psychotic break in many years. He made a medication change last June. His doctor agreed to try some new medication, and 9 months later, I saw it coming, but 9 months later, he became quite ill, tried to commit suicide, was hospitalized, was released again, and really found a way to get himself back into the hospital through his diabetes. He currently is in an acute care unit in Colorado Springs, but he is recovering. He has agreed to go back on his Clozaril, and it's been a week, I think now. I just spoke to them today, and he's stable and doing great. And we're looking at a long-term care facility for him now. So,
Thank you.
sure.
I thought just to mention that, I mean, what you're looking at here are two women who have really been through a tremendous amount. You'll read all about it in the book, and both of them have, in each in their own individual way, have come out the other side. It's a thrill for me to acknowledge them in public this way, so close to the week of the launch of the book, and coming right after Oprah Winfrey. It feels a little like a talk show, but seriously, it's amazing. And I think there's hope in this book because of these two women, despite everything that happens in the book.
That's amazing. What an amazing experience to see you in person. It's just a gift. So I want to open it up to questions in just about a minute. I'll just ask you, Bob, one more question while the chat window fills up. So everyone just type your questions into the chat window and I will ask them. So we're all in the middle of a crisis right now. I'm wondering what we can learn from those in the book, like Margaret and Lindsay, who have been able to overcome so much trauma, about resilience, about forgiveness, about making it through something that seems so impossible.
I really believe that the story of this family is very meaningful, especially in difficult situations. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a once-in-a-lifetime challenge for all of us that we're going through right now. But I really believe the Galvan family story has a lot to teach about dealing with challenges and weathering tragedy. It's about people who find themselves traumatized and find ways to work through it. It's about finding the humanity in moments like that and refusing to shut down, and about refusing to turn inward and rediscovering the humanity in people. Despite all the terrible things that the family goes through, it's about hope. I mean, the big question for me, aside from what schizophrenia is and what this family has to teach us about schizophrenia, was how this family still remains a family. And I sort of took that on as a second investigative question as I interviewed everyone. And I asked them all the same question over and over. You know, why didn't you just leave town and never come back? And maybe send a Christmas card from time to time. And they all had different answers, and I hope to do it justice in the book.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have our first question. It is from Karen Abbott, the author. She says, "Great talk, Ada and Bob, and how cool to meet Margaret and Lindsay. Can you talk about any difficulties you had, Bob, in researching or writing the book? What was the most challenging experience?"
I really didn't know if any medical records existed, and I wanted to do my best to write about the mentally ill brothers as individuals, so it wouldn't just be like, and then Peter went crazy, and then Matthew went crazy. You know, I needed to make it clear that these were human beings. And so there came a point where I was just hoping against hope that there might be some documentation that really told the story of how they became sick in the first place. And so I sweated that for a while. And thanks to help from Lindsay, there was a day in the basement at the Pueblo State Mental Hospital with 2 huge roller carts filled with accordion folders overflowing, where I was madly scanning with my phone, you know, every page I could find. And there was information in there that came as news to everyone in the family. Small and larger revelations that really brought the past to life in a way that I never expected.
That's fantastic. Okay, great. Well, and I'm actually wondering, now that you just mentioned that, you have a history on the crime beat, and so I'm sure you have experience breaking news to people that you are asking questions of. I'm sure you're good at it by now, but was that difficult, having to ask those questions with all the information that you had gathered?
Yeah, I mean, it helped that both Margaret and Lindsay, even from that very first phone call, were very upfront and had done a lot of work on their own to process the trauma. So there wasn't a lot of pulling teeth there. They were like, "Yep, this happened." And they watched me process it. But then asking everybody else, all of the other brothers, 6 Well brothers are still around with their own opinions about it. Their friends, high school friends, and then talking to the doctors about what they thought of them. That it became a very touchy and diplomatic at times, for sure.
Which brings us to the chat box is filling up. Very good. So Pamela Frank asks, how has this book impacted the family dynamics?
Of this particular family?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was on the phone with Richard Galvin, another brother in the family, and he said that they are talking to one another. There was a taping for a TV thing that's going to happen in hopefully it'll go on the air in a couple of weeks, where apparently both Richard and Mark were in tears on camera. So they're sometimes when you have difficulties in your life, you spend a lot of your day or your week not thinking about it. This book is bringing a lot of it to the surface, and that's really something. And I think a lot of the issues that the family has had really predate the book, and perhaps the bigger trauma that's happened these days isn't the trauma of having the world stare at you, but perhaps the loss of Mimi Galvin, the mother of the family, who really in many ways, siblings who share a parent, that's their common ground, and now she's gone, and so the ground has shifted.
So we now have a cousin. It says, hi, this is Mary and Margaret's cousin. So it's Barbara. Do you think your mom ever told my mom about what was happening? So I guess this is a question for the sisters. We knew they were ill, but I never heard any of the details that were shared in the book. So this was news to her.
Are the ladies still here?
Yes, I think so. And looks like they're unmuted. Are you? Oh, and they're unmuted now. Okay.
Yeah. I think my mom kept her heart pretty close to her. She wasn't really one to talk about this, and that comes through in the book, I think. I think towards the end, though, she was willing to be interviewed by Robert Kolker, which was a milestone for her to get over the hurdle of actually speaking about it. So she was able to do that for a little while, but then she had a stroke, and it prevented her from speaking in a way that he could actually understand what she was saying. So I think she kept things pretty close.
There was quite a day where both sisters and I were visiting with Mimi, and Mimi was a natural deflector, the way that some parents are. They don't want to talk about anything unpleasant. So I would ask an unpleasant question to this poor, frail 91-year-old woman, and she would half answer it and then move on to something else, like the food she was eating. And then either Margaret or Lindsay would say, "Mom," and then try to steer her back on track to get to have her talk about more difficult subjects. So that was a very delicate day, but she really came through and talked about the shame she had felt a long time ago in that period where parents were really blamed.
That's great. Okay, so a question from Miami, from Marianne Parker, asking, what was your writing process like? And as a fellow nonfiction writer, many of us who write nonfiction are in awe of you for synthesizing so much material in such a beautiful, elegant way. It really does read like a novel. So what was your writing process? Do you write while you research? Do you research a lot and then write? How did you do it?
I think while I research, I'll probably stash away sentences here or there that pop in, that things I ought to use. Essentially, I'm writing notes to my future self. Where my future self ends up really thanking my past self, saying, "Oh, thank God I wrote that down. Oh, nice, good, go me. That was good to have." And they wind up being prompts to help me out. I sort of have a loose structure for what I wanted to do. I knew that certain siblings, like Lindsay, like Margaret, like Michael Galvin, who we haven't talked about tonight, would sort of have their own showcases in the book, and that others might only come up when they're needed and help provide perspective. And I started to think of the book as having two parts, like East of Eden has two parts, one with the older generation and one with the younger generation. So the first part one is mainly about Mimi and her husband Don, the mother and father of the family, raising a family and it all going wrong. And then part two is the children as they grow up, and you follow them and see what happens to them as they go on. So that then it keeps breaking down into smaller and smaller chunks. So I guess the real answer is cutting down everything into very small tasks so that it doesn't seem so big.
That's great. Helpful. Okay, so Erin Vanderhoof would like to know, how do you, all of you, she said, so so perhaps the Galvins want to chime in as well, think about the idea of neurodiversity. Some people don't like the word disorder, but with the Galvins, it's true that their lives seem to have been really quite affected by this. So what is your take, Bob, on neurodiversity?
Well, thanks for the question, Erin. Neurodiversity, I think, when it comes to autism, is about understanding difference, and with other brain disorders too. I guess when neurodiversity gets applied to something like schizophrenia, the real way it manifests is with something like the hearing voices movement, which is people who are arguing that just because you sometimes are hearing voices or might have hallucinations doesn't mean that you need to be cordoned off from society. You can also still have a very functional life. And it speaks to mental illness as a spectrum, right? It could be very debilitating and severe, or it could be functional. And there is data that cited toward the end of the book of something like 5 or 7%, depending on the study, of people have said that they've heard voices before, without it necessarily being considered to be a severe mental illness. So I think I've had conversations with Lindsay, I think, where she believes that if there were early intervention for some of her brothers, if there were more tolerance and less stigma for some of their behavior, that perhaps they would have had a chance not to have had so many psychotic breaks and not be so damaged. So that, to me, that's the hope of the Galvin story, that today it might not play out the same way.
That's great. Okay, and this is a question for Margaret and Lindsay. Did the mental illness of 6 of your siblings bring the rest of you closer together, or did it drive you apart? Do you feel up to answering that?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think for Margaret and I, it brought us a lot closer together over the course of our healing process. I think we both engaged in extensive therapy, and we held hands on that journey together. That it was a journey where we chose to go a different direction than the rest of our family in respect to getting therapy. Our parents were quite opposed to psychotherapy because of the schizophrenic mother and how our parents had been blamed for the illness. And so when the two of us chose to take that path, we really were there for each other through that process, through thick and thin. I think that it affected all of us differently. My brother John moved away right away because it was horrific for his new wife. And so I think my brother Michael left at 18. And so a lot of the boys, the first chance they got, they distanced themselves as much as possible. And I think maybe because we were the 2 youngest, we were 2 girls. I think in society, girls are allowed more lenience in respect to getting therapy than boys are, particularly in that era. And so, it was, it had a different effect on each one of us. I think that it's a challenge to keep a family like this together. I mean, spending time around schizophrenics is no easy task for anybody, particularly when you love them dearly. And so, it's hard, but I'm certainly, Mimi tried her best to do that. And all we can do is keep moving forward and trying to stay in touch as best we can. And I think Bob Kolker has done a wonderful job of showing how that is possible in a family with so much dysfunction. I think he's really tried to bring to the forefront the hope that families with tremendous illnesses, whether it's schizophrenia, autism, you name it, any disease for that matter, can join hands and be stronger together than if they splinter.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
I'll just, unless, were you going to Margaret, or were you moving on?
Did you want to add something, Margaret?
No, that's okay. I thought she put that quite well.
Okay. Yeah, that was beautiful. Did you want to add something?
One of the more complicated parts of this book is that everyone does sort of arrive at their own truth and their own way of dealing, and it's not always the same as their sibling. So the family may still be a family, but it's not like, it's not a Disney ending. Everyone is on their own path.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, so our next question, and please everyone feel free to add more questions. We have a few more minutes left. So if you want to get a last one in, go for it. Carson Everett asks, do you have a favorite nonfiction author who inspires you?
I really love narrative nonfiction that lifts the veil on a world that you might not see otherwise. So I love Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc and her book Random Family. It's really a favorite of mine. And with this book, I also turn to Michael Lewis a lot, because he has this way of folding in really complicated concepts and information that might put you to sleep, but he does it in such a strategic and quick and easy way that you only get exactly as much as you need at the moment you need it, and then it's back off to the narrative. And that was my goal with this book as well.
That's great. When is Adrienne next book coming out, the comedian's book? Have you heard anything?
I have not. I'll be there on Zoom, waiting for the Zoom event.
Ready to go. Okay, so David Madigan asks, what was your big aha moment when meeting the family? Did you have an aha moment?
It's a good question. Well, I think the biggest moment was meeting the three surviving mentally ill brothers, because it was an open question to me: how is I going to write about mental illness as it manifests itself, and how do you differentiate people? How do you write about them as human beings? And suddenly, just it all became very, very clear. Hanging out in the same rooms with them, going to lunch with Peter, it became suddenly the book became much clearer to me.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, Jill writes, I came in late, but in case it was not asked, were the siblings afraid to pass it down to further generations? Did that come up, Bob, when you were speaking with everyone, with the family? Was there a fear?
Absolutely. In the book, both Margaret and Lindsay have moments where they're worried about it, and they go directly to one of the researchers who maintained ties with them to ask questions about that. The inheritance pattern of schizophrenia is so weird that one generation could really be afflicted and then it could disappear again and not pop up until somebody's great nephew. It's really hard to nail down, but the researcher they talked to tried to give them a lot of confidence to say that, you might have had a 2% chance in the general population, but it's really 3 or 4% now for you, that it's still very low. And so not to put words in their mouth, although it's there in the book, like they were reassured that way. But there's always anxiety as a parent, and I try to get that across in the final part of the book. When I talk about the next generation, I see half of Kate's face there in the Zoom. Hello. But there was, how could you not worry having a child if you were a member of the Galvan family? So that becomes a part of the story as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, as a grandchild, there were periods. Nathan Galvin writes in. Did you see that? As a grandchild, there were periods in my early childhood when I was concerned myself. So, yes. Okay, and then someone else who has a family with members who were schizophrenic. It wasn't discussed, but it was very painful when they shut themselves off from everyone. I just want to thank you for writing this book. So I think it's going to mean a lot to a lot of people. We're coming up on our time. Can I ask you, so much has happened already for this book. It's just been out, 5 minutes. What's your hope for it? What do you want people to get out of it, and to for it to kind of accomplish in the world beyond what it already does?
Well, I think my hope for it would be that it works as a family saga, like a multi-generational saga, like you're watching a miniseries, but that it also is, it's an introduction to a very complicated subject that I know I didn't even know much about going into it. So you might actually come away really learning something about a population that doesn't really often speak for themselves. So I guess the bigger goal is that it gives a voice to a population that really still has a bit of a stigma. I'll share this. I don't know if she's on the call, but my amazing editor, Chris Popolo, said to me not long ago that she would be telling people what book she was editing, and suddenly these people who she thought she knew pretty well would be sharing stories about family members who had acute mental illness. And, it just goes to show how people sweep it under the rug even now. And my response to Chris was, me too. I talk to people about it too, and I have the same experience. I thought I knew these people, but there are these things you don't talk about. And so anything that helps in that effort is good, I hope.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to mean a lot to a lot of people, and it's really going to open this conversation up in a fantastic way. So I noticed that Books Are Magic has posted the link. So everyone who is on this call, you can go and order your copy of Hidden Valley Road right now. They're wonderful gifts, Easter gifts. I've given it to a couple people already, and recommend everyone else does too. Thank you so much. This is a real achievement, and how lovely to have some of the family on the call too. It's a real tribute.
Ada, thank you for pinch hitting this way. I'm really grateful that you took the time, and thanks everyone.